He was a highly arrogant, toxic tech startup founder who highly maliciously fired his highly devoted girlfriend, highly publicly humiliating her entirely. In front entirely of his highly glamorous 22-year-old influencer mistress and all their elite friends. He highly toxically explicitly told her that she was absolutely just a highly pathetic, outdated asset who actively dragged his highly massive brand completely down. He highly arrogantly threw a highly pathetic severance check directly in her pale face. He genuinely, toxically, thought he had completely, violently destroyed her. He possessed absolutely zero microscopic idea that the exact quiet woman he literally just violently discarded was officially the highly brilliant genius who had highly secretly written the highly complex source code that actively made his highly pathetic company officially worth exactly 1 billion rubles, or $15 million. And exactly when he confidently struts completely into the highly exclusive boardroom, entirely to highly proudly sell his massive company directly to a highly terrifying, ruthless billionaire. He doesn't successfully meet a highly elite board of directors. He successfully meets his highly publicly discarded ex-girlfriend, highly actively preparing to completely, violently annihilate his absolute entire massive existence. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful family. If you fiercely believe that absolute karma always successfully collects its highly massive debts, and you absolutely love highly explosive stories of ultimate revenge and pure resilience, you absolutely must hear this incredible story. Please smash that like button to strongly support our content. Subscribe to our channel, and let me know exactly what you would do if your partner fired you and replaced you with an influencer in the comments below. Let's get directly into the source code of revenge. Part 1. The public execution. You are exactly 32 agonizing years old, Elena. You are, entirely in highly absolute essence, a highly pathetic, outdated code actively on the highly competitive market, highly desperately actively searching entirely for the absolute next highly pathetic update. Julian absolutely did not violently scream. He highly arrogantly, smoothly swirled his highly expensive vintage whiskey, his deep voice heavily oozing completely with exactly that highly terrifying, quiet, toxic pity. Chloe is incredibly fresh, highly simple. Chloe Vance laughed loudly, fiercely holding his strong hand, the highly massive diamond perfectly on her delicate finger, brilliantly catching the bright light. The highly exact same massive diamond that Elena had highly lovingly helped him meticulously choose entirely for his highly arrogant mother. Absolutely not a highly pathetic husband completely yet, and exactly now absolutely no highly pathetic job completely either. Julian beautifully smiled, highly arrogantly, throwing the highly thick envelope completely with the highly official termination notice completely onto the highly polished mahogany table. Highly generously take exactly as highly pathetic charity, Elena. It is officially the absolute only highly pathetic value that you officially possess, completely left. He highly arrogantly, genuinely thought that she would violently cry. He highly toxically thought that she would highly pathetically beg. He absolutely did not vividly see the highly imposing man, flawlessly wearing a highly dark gray bespoke suit, highly silently, intensely, observing completely from the highly dark shadows. The highly terrifying man, who highly legally owned the absolute entire massive building, entirely in which they were highly arrogantly, confidently standing. The heavy air completely inside the golden lily, the absolute most highly exclusive, elite rooftop lounge entirely in massive Moscow or New York, aggressively smelled entirely of highly expensive designer perfume and highly toxic betrayal. It was highly officially supposed entirely to absolutely be a highly festive night, entirely of massive celebration, entirely for the elite CEO entirely of Vanguard Logistics. A highly massive night entirely for which Elena Sterling had highly brutally worked, entirely for exactly 5 agonizing years. She had highly meticulously built the highly complex back-end infrastructure, flawlessly smoothed completely out the highly terrifying regulatory cracks, and practically highly single-handedly, beautifully raised Julian Vanguard completely from a highly chaotic, pathetic startup founder directly into a highly terrifying tech magnate. And exactly, this was officially her highly pathetic reward. A highly public execution, highly maliciously disguised exactly as a highly pathetic breakup. Elena completely, violently, froze perfectly near the highly exclusive VIP zone. The highly expensive silk entirely of her emerald designer dress, highly suddenly physically feeling exactly like a highly lethal boa constrictor violently squeezing her dry throat. Julian Vanguard, the exact man completely with whom she had happily lived entirely for significantly over 4 agonizing years, confidently stood perfectly in front entirely of her absolutely, not completely with a highly expensive ring, but completely with a highly toxic audience. To his absolute left fiercely clung Chloe Vance, a highly glamorous, exactly 22-year-old elite influencer whose highly absolute main massive contribution completely to elite society was highly pathetic unboxing videos and highly apparently, highly maliciously stealing romantic partners. "You are highly actively making a highly dramatic scene, Julian," Elena stated. Her beautiful voice was incredibly firm, entirely despite the highly violent trembling entirely in her soft hands. She highly fiercely refused entirely to highly generously give him the highly pathetic hot tears that he highly clearly, desperately sought. "I am highly simply stating highly cold facts, Elle," Julian smoothly replied, highly maliciously using the highly intimate nickname that he had highly lovingly whispered entirely in the pitch-black darkness, absolutely, just a highly few short nights completely ago. He highly meticulously adjusted the highly expensive lapels entirely of his highly bespoke jacket. Intensely look directly at completely yourself. You are completely, utterly exhausted. You have completely, violently lost your highly sharp grip. Vanguard Logistics is exactly now officially a highly massive billion-ruble or multi-million-dollar massive company. I highly desperately need a highly elite partner who flawlessly reflects exactly that highly vibrant, pure life force. Chloe flawlessly embodies the massive future. You, well, you highly pathetically embody highly exhausting, grueling hard work. You, Chloe, highly successfully actively made highly pathetic duck lips, highly surgically brought completely to highly absolute perfection. Elena highly coldly retorted. "Do absolutely not be incredibly mean, Julian. She visually seems incredibly sweet. Entirely for her highly young age, she is incredibly vintage." Chloe laughed loudly, the highly toxic circle entirely of elite spectators, highly fake friends whom Elena had highly graciously hosted, entirely at highly expensive dinners, highly massive investors whom she had highly charmingly charmed, laughed loudly. It was a highly nervous, incredibly obsequious, toxic laugh. The highly specific kind that absolutely always highly pathetically follows massive money. Highly completely regardless entirely of highly absolute morality. Isabella. The highly supposed elite best friend and highly loyal university roommate entirely of Elena, confidently stepped completely forward. Elena physically felt a highly brief flash entirely of pure hope. Isabella would completely, violently stop exactly this. "He is completely 100% right, Elena," Isabella stated. Her piercing eyes were incredibly freezing cold, exactly as she highly eagerly handed Julian a highly fresh, expensive drink. "You have absolutely been highly actively dragging completely down the highly pristine brand aesthetics entirely for agonizing months. It is completely, utterly embarrassing." The highly brutal betrayal violently hit significantly harder than the highly toxic breakup. Elena intensely looked directly at Isabella, profoundly realizing entirely in a highly sickening, massive flash exactly why Isabella had so incredibly, highly persistently, highly aggressively urged Elena entirely to highly pathetically skip the absolute last exactly 3 highly critical board of directors meetings. It absolutely wasn't entirely for highly necessary rest. It was a highly meticulous, toxic coup. "The highly massive severance check," Julian stated, highly smoothly nodding directly toward the thick envelope perfectly on the massive table. "Incredibly generous. Exactly 6 agonizing months entirely of highly massive salary. Highly completely sufficient entirely to highly easily successfully find completely yourself a highly pathetic cat and a highly decent cheap studio apartment absolutely somewhere incredibly far, completely away. I honestly do not completely know. In highly pathetic Queens or Bibi Revo." Elena incredibly slowly extended her soft hand. Her delicate fingers highly gently touched the thick envelope. The massive room completely violently quieted completely down. She smoothly took it, highly acutely physically feeling the massive crushing weight entirely of her absolute dignity, entirely in her soft hands. Then, she completely, violently, tore it completely in highly perfect half. The highly sharp sound entirely of violently tearing paper was significantly louder than a highly violent scream entirely in the highly quiet lounge. She completely, violently, tore it completely again, and completely, over completely again, highly generously letting the highly expensive confetti beautifully rain completely down directly into the highly expensive vintage whiskey. Entirely of Julian. "I absolutely do not fiercely want your highly pathetic massive money, Julian," Elena stated, her beautiful voice violently dropping exactly 1 highly terrifying octave, miraculously becoming incredibly freezing ice. "And I absolutely do not fiercely want your highly pathetic, toxic pity. Do you genuinely, arrogantly think that you highly successfully built exactly this massive company? You are absolutely just the highly pathetic face. I was officially the highly solid spine, and highly completely honestly, your highly pathetic posture has absolutely always, perfectly been, completely, utterly terrible." She smoothly turned completely around perfectly on her highly expensive heels. Completely, utterly, ignoring the highly shocked, pathetic stuttering entirely of Julian, and confidently walked directly toward the highly grand exit. She highly proudly held her delicate head incredibly high. Her highly expensive heels highly loudly tapping a highly confident rhythm entirely of absolute survival, completely on the highly polished marble floor. She absolutely did not actively look completely back. She absolutely did not vividly see the highly pathetic, sympathetic glances or the highly cruel, toxic smiles. She simply highly desperately needed fresh air. She highly aggressively pushed the highly heavy glass doors completely open directly onto the highly expansive terrace. Finally, completely, utterly, completely, from the highly toxic noise. She confidently walked directly to the highly cold parapet, fiercely gripping the highly freezing metal, intensely looking directly at the highly beautiful skyline, entirely of massive Moscow or New York, or absolutely only. Exactly then did she highly generously permit the absolute first hot tear entirely to violently fall. It was incredibly hot and highly angry. Exactly. That was a highly expensive, incredibly dramatic, highly epic exit. A highly deep, incredibly hoarse voice loudly resonated completely from the highly dark shadows, entirely of a highly massive decorative column. Elena violently jumped, instantly, highly aggressively wiping her pale face. The highly exclusive lounge is completely closed entirely for a highly private corporate event. You absolutely should not, highly possibly actively be perfectly here. The massive man confidently stepped completely out directly into the highly dim, soft light. He was incredibly tall, highly imposing, flawlessly wearing a highly bespoke suit that highly easily cost significantly more than the highly expensive car, entirely of Julian. He successfully possessed highly distinguished dark hair, completely, with highly elegant silver, perfectly at the sharp temples, and piercing eyes that highly actively seemed entirely to completely, violently dissect her absolute soul. Alexander Sterling, the exact same. Alexander Sterling, the highly terrifying, elite CEO entirely of Sterling Global. A highly gigantic, global, massive conglomerate that highly routinely and highly pathetic little companies, exactly like Vanguard Logistics, entirely for highly cheap breakfast. He absolutely should not, highly possibly actively be perfectly here. He absolutely should highly actively be entirely in freezing Zurich or massive Tokyo, highly aggressively actively managing the entire massive world. I highly legally own exactly this massive building, Alexander stated incredibly quietly, confidently taking exactly one massive step significantly closer. He absolutely did not highly pathetically offer a highly cheap handkerchief. He absolutely wasn't exactly that highly pathetic cliché. He highly smoothly offered a highly expensive lighter, highly loudly clicking it completely open entirely to beautifully illuminate the pitch-black darkness. Exactly, although absolutely neither, entirely of them, highly actively smoked. I highly clearly vividly saw the highly pathetic show completely inside, violently tearing the highly massive check, a highly heavy massive hand, but incredibly effective. He highly toxically genuinely thinks I am officially highly pathetic yesterday, Elena stated, a highly bitter, toxic chuckle violently escaping completely from her soft lips. A highly pathetic, depreciating asset. Julian Vanguard is absolutely just a highly pathetic child, highly happily actively playing completely with a highly cheap calculator, Alexander stated, highly smoothly closing the expensive lighter. I have absolutely been highly meticulously, actively tracking his highly complex logistical algorithms. They are completely, utterly sloppy. I highly accurately assume that you highly successfully wrote the highly brilliant original source code. but absolutely someone completely else has absolutely been highly pathetically fixing it completely since the highly busy third quarter. Elena rapidly blinked, completely, utterly stunned. Yes, exactly how did you highly possibly profoundly know? Because highly absolute efficiency completely, violently, dropped exactly 4.2% entirely in the absolute last exactly 6 agonizing months, Alexander explicitly stated incredibly simply. Exactly around the highly exact same massive time, I highly accurately assume, he highly aggressively began to highly actively optimize his highly private personal life completely with Miss Vance. He intensely looked directly at her. Truly, genuinely intensely looked directly at her. He absolutely did not vividly see a highly pathetic, 32-year-old completely exhausted old maid. He vividly saw a highly sharp intellect entirely in her piercing eyes, highly absolute steel entirely in her strong spine. You are officially Elena Sterling, or Lorena, he stated. It absolutely was not a highly pathetic question. Absolute top entirely of your highly elite class, entirely an elite university. Highly specialized entirely in highly complex supply chain automation. You highly secretly ghost wrote the highly brilliant code that literally just miraculously made exactly that highly pathetic idiot completely inside a multimillionaire. Formally, I was absolutely just the highly pathetic operations manager, Elena softly muttered. I absolutely didn't give a single pathetic damn entirely about highly fancy titles. I absolutely just highly fiercely wanted the massive company entirely to highly successfully work. And exactly that is exactly, precisely exactly, why you are exactly now officially completely unemployed, Alexander stated incredibly cruelly. Highly pathetic humility is officially a highly expensive luxury entirely for the highly arrogant rich Miss Sterling. For the absolute rest entirely of U.S., it is officially a highly toxic liability. He confidently reached completely into his deep pocket and smoothly pulled completely out a highly simple, incredibly elegant black business card. Absolutely no highly flashy logo. Absolutely only a highly secure number and a highly powerful name, beautifully engraved entirely in pure silver. Sterling. I absolutely do not highly pathetically hire entirely out of highly pathetic charity, Alexander stated, highly smoothly extending it directly to her. But I officially possess a highly massive toxic mess entirely in my highly critical North American transport division. My highly terrifying sister, Eleanor, is highly aggressively firing elite analysts significantly faster than I can highly possibly successfully hire them. If you can highly successfully survive her highly brutal interview, you highly officially possess a highly elite job. If you violently cry exactly like you are highly actively doing right exactly now, do absolutely not highly pathetically bother entirely to highly urgently call. He smoothly turned completely around and confidently walked completely away, completely, before she could absolutely even highly politely explicitly say thank you. Elena intensely looked directly at the highly elegant black card. It physically felt significantly heavier than the highly massive severance check had absolutely ever highly possibly been. Inside, the highly annoying music violently became significantly louder. Julian was highly happily drinking completely to his highly pathetic, massive future, but confidently standing perfectly in the freezing cold and fiercely holding the highly elegant black card. Elena profoundly realized that her highly massive, beautiful future had literally just confidentially walked completely right, completely past her. Elena just got a job offer from the billionaire CEO who owns the building. Do you think she should take it? Tell us below. Part 2. The brutal interview. The highly massive transition completely from highly elite partner and absolute CEO entirely to completely unemployed was incredibly rapid and highly brutal. Within exactly 24 agonizing hours, Julian had completely, violently blocked her highly absolute access completely to the highly secure corporate servers. Isabella had completely, violently blocked her highly secure number. Chloe had highly proudly posted a highly toxic video entirely on TikTok, highly maliciously mocking highly bitter toxic exes that highly rapidly amassed exactly 3 million massive views. Elena absolutely did not highly pathetically watch it. She was way too incredibly highly busy, highly meticulously actively preparing entirely for the absolute second massive war. She highly aggressively spent exactly 3 agonizing days entirely in her highly quiet apartment. Absolutely not highly pathetically drowning entirely in hot tears, but highly meticulously studying. She highly analytically analyzed the highly complex public reports entirely of Sterling Global, their highly complex transport waybills, their highly massive logistical bottlenecks. She profoundly knew that Alexander Sterling absolutely was not highly pathetically offering her a highly pathetic handout. He was highly aggressively offering her a highly terrifying challenge. On the absolute 4th massive day, she confidently walked completely into the highly imposing Sterling Global Tower. It was an absolute terrifying monolith entirely of freezing glass and solid steel. A highly striking, massive contrast completely to the highly cheap, pathetic loft atmosphere, completely with highly exposed brick walls, entirely of Vanguard logistics, exactly. This was officially highly elite, old money, highly serious, absolute power. The highly brutal interview absolutely was not completely with Alexander. It was completely with Eleanor Sterling, the highly terrifying younger sister entirely of Alexander, and the highly ruthless chief operating officer, COO. Eleanor was completely, utterly terrifying. She safely sat perfectly behind a highly massive desk, flawlessly made, completely out entirely of highly recycled aviation metal, highly casually filing her perfectly manicured nails entirely, while Elena safely sat perfectly on a highly uncomfortable chair that physically felt highly deliberately, intentionally uncomfortable. My highly arrogant brother highly toxically explicitly says that you highly successfully possess highly massive potential, Eleanor stated. Absolutely not, actively raising her piercing eyes. I highly genuinely think that your highly pathetic baggage is absolutely just a highly massive pile entirely of highly toxic waste, completely from Julian Vanguard. Why exactly should I highly generously permit you anywhere incredibly close directly to my highly secure data? Because your highly massive distribution center entirely in highly busy Asia is completely, violently losing massive money, Elena stated, highly smoothly pushing a highly thick folder completely across the massive desk. I have highly meticulously analyzed your highly complex shipping routes. You are highly actively using a highly suspicious third-party contractor entirely in massive Singapore that is highly illegally overcharging you. Highly massive fuel surcharges completely by exactly 15%. It is completely, violently buried entirely in the highly complex sub-ledger. Eleanor completely stopped highly actively filing. She intensely looked directly at the thick folder, then directly at Elena. Her piercing eyes were exactly the highly exact same, highly freezing ice blue color exactly as absolutely those entirely of Alexander. She smoothly opened the thick folder, highly rapidly scanning the highly complex data. The highly heavy silence, highly agonizingly, lasted entirely for exactly 1 highly long minute. "Arthur!" Eleanor highly violently barked. An older man, perhaps exactly 60, highly distinguished years old, confidently entered, highly slowly shuffling completely from a highly quiet side office. He visually looked exactly like a highly kind, sweet grandfather, flawlessly wearing a highly comfortable cardigan that highly likely easily cost significantly more than the highly cheap car entirely of Elena. This was officially Arthur Sterling, the highly respected uncle entirely of Alexander and Eleanor, and the highly terrifying, absolute legal shark entirely of the massive company. "Yes, my beautiful dear." Arthur beautifully smiled, highly warmly, completely at Elena. "She highly successfully found the highly toxic leak entirely in massive Singapore," Eleanor stated, her beautiful voice completely, utterly devoid, entirely, of absolutely any emotion. "In exactly 3 short days, it highly agonizingly took our highly elite internal audit group exactly 3 agonizing months, and they completely, catastrophically hissed it." Arthur laughed loudly. "Well then, highly warmly welcome completely aboard, Mrs. Sterling, or Lorena. Do absolutely not highly generously let Eleanor highly pathetically intimidate you. She highly violently bites, but she is highly fully vaccinated." Elena was highly officially hired, exactly as a highly elite senior analyst. It was officially a highly massive demotion completely compared completely to her highly elite past life. But an absolute, massive step completely forward. Entirely in absolutely every single, completely other highly meaningful sense. She took what? Highly head first completely into the highly exhausting work. She confidently arrived the absolute first. She confidently left the absolute last. She flawlessly wore highly simple, severe suits, highly tightly pulled her beautiful hair completely back, and highly proudly let her highly brilliant work highly actively speak completely for completely herself. Part 3. The Corporate Trap. Exactly 2 agonizing months seamlessly passed. Elena had absolutely not vividly seen Alexander completely since exactly that highly dark balcony. He was a highly terrifying ghost, entirely in the massive machine. His highly secure emails highly ruthlessly dictated the highly complex flow entirely of the massive empire. But the highly toxic past absolutely had not completely finished completely with her. One highly quiet Tuesday evening, entirely while highly meticulously checking highly complex accounts, entirely for a highly potential massive merger, Elena highly shockingly noticed absolutely something incredibly strange. Sterling Global was highly actively seeking a highly lucrative opportunity entirely to highly aggressively acquire a highly successful mid-sized logistics company, entirely to highly efficiently handle highly complex internal last-mile deliveries. The highly absolute favorite entirely for the highly massive acquisition, Vanguard Logistics. The massive heart entirely of Elena violently pounded. She dug significantly, infinitely deeper, completely into the highly confidential diligence files. The highly complex numbers visually seemed incredibly, highly perfect. Way too incredibly, highly perfect. She highly agonizingly remembered the highly dark night that Julian had highly secretively spent completely with Isabella, highly suspiciously looking completely through the highly complex books. She highly vividly remembered the highly frantic, massive restructuring that Julian had highly aggressively actively done, perfectly right, perfectly before the highly anticipated IPO. Elena highly urgently pulled the highly complex raw data. She highly meticulously overlaid her absolute own, highly brilliant old algorithms, the highly exact ones that she had highly successfully written, completely onto the highly official current reports entirely of Julian. They absolutely did not completely add completely up. Julian was highly illegally, maliciously inflating his highly critical user metrics. He was highly illegally counting highly newly initiated shipments exactly as highly officially completed massive revenue. It was a highly classic, completely illegal, pump and dump massive scheme, flawlessly dressed entirely in a highly expensive, bespoke suit. If Alexander highly expensively bought Vanguard Logistics, he would absolutely be highly expensively buying a highly pathetic, empty shell. And Julian would highly arrogantly, confidently walk completely away, completely with hundreds, entirely of millions, ruthlessly leaving Sterling Global entirely to highly pathetically clean, completely up the highly catastrophic, toxic mess. You visually look exactly as if you literally just vividly saw a highly terrifying ghost, stated a highly deep voice. Elena violently spun completely around. Alexander Sterling was confidently standing perfectly there, smoothly leaning completely against the highly secure doorframe. It was exactly 9 p.m. The highly massive office was completely, utterly empty. Mr. Sterling. She confidently stood completely up, highly nervously smoothing her highly simple skirt. I absolutely did not completely know that you were absolutely still, entirely in the massive building. I highly peacefully live entirely in the luxury penthouse, Alexander stated, confidently entering her highly tiny, modest office. He visually looked incredibly exhausted, his highly expensive tie aggressively loosened. Eleanor highly explicitly told me that you are officially a highly efficient machine. She highly genuinely, truly likes you. She absolutely hates absolutely everyone. I am absolutely just highly efficiently doing my highly exhausting work, Elena stated. And exactly what is your highly exhausting work, highly actively explicitly telling you, right exactly now? Alexander highly vaguely pointed directly at her highly advanced screens, which were completely, violently covered completely with highly bright red flags and highly highlighted complex spreadsheets. Elena violently hesitated. If she highly bravely actively spoke, she would visually look exactly like a highly bitter, vengeful ex-girlfriend, highly maliciously attempting to highly toxically sabotage the highly massive jackpot entirely of Julian. If she highly cowardly safely remained completely silent, the massive company that she exactly now highly profoundly respected would completely violently lose highly massive millions. Absolute truth is significantly more highly important than highly pathetic emotions. The highly anticipated acquisition entirely of Vanguard Logistics, Elena stated incredibly clearly, is an absolute, highly toxic trap. The handsome expression entirely of Alexander absolutely did not violently change. Highly explicitly explain the highly complex revenue recognition policy. She highly confidently pointed directly at the bright screen. Julian highly illegally changed it entirely in the highly busy fourth quarter. He is highly illegally actively recognizing highly massive revenue completely before highly official delivery. Exactly this highly illegally inflates the highly critical EBIT completely by exactly 30%. Highly legally, it is officially a highly dangerous gray area, but highly operationally, it is absolute suicide. The massive company officially possesses absolutely zero highly positive cash flow. It is highly, desperately, actively running completely on highly toxic debts, highly maliciously disguised exactly as highly legitimate receivables. Alexander confidently walked significantly closer, confidently standing perfectly right, perfectly next, completely to her. He highly intoxicatingly smelled entirely of highly expensive sandalwood and highly premium vintage whiskey. Highly expensive whiskey, significantly better than Julian had absolutely ever highly successfully drank. He smoothly leaned completely in. His strong hand highly gently rested perfectly on the massive desk. Perfectly right. Perfectly next. Completely to her soft hand, exactly as he highly intensely studied the highly complex numbers. The highly close proximity was completely electric. But his highly intense attention was completely, 100%, purely professional. "Can you highly successfully prove exactly this?" Alexander asked, his deep voice incredibly low. "I highly successfully wrote the highly brilliant source code," Elena stated. "I profoundly know exactly where the highly toxic bodies are completely buried entirely, because I highly meticulously dug the highly deep graves. Highly metaphorically. I can highly easily prove it. But I highly desperately need highly absolute access completely to the highly complex raw server data, which I absolutely do not highly successfully possess." Alexander incredibly slowly straightened completely up. He intensely looked directly at her, incredibly intensely, and highly calculatingly. "We officially possess the highly anticipated final negotiation meeting completely with Julian and his highly elite team exactly tomorrow. They are highly aggressively insisting completely on a highly rapid, immediate closing. Marcus Thorne, my highly terrifying, ruthless competitor, is absolutely also highly aggressively, actively bidding, highly maliciously driving the highly expensive price violently UP. Marcus Thorne, an absolute, terrifying shark," Elena highly strictly warned. "If he highly shockingly discovers exactly this completely, before you highly successfully do, he will highly aggressively short sell the massive company, violently crash the highly valuable shares, and highly publicly, completely destroy Julian. But exactly if you highly expensively buy it, the highly catastrophic loss will absolutely be completely, 100% yours. Then, we highly desperately need to completely, violently expose exactly this, entirely, in the highly massive room," Alexander fiercely decided. "Tomorrow, you are confidently coming completely with me." "Mr. Sterling, I absolutely cannot," Elena violently panicked. "Julian, the highly aggressive media, the highly toxic narrative is exactly that. I am officially the highly crazy, toxic ex-girlfriend. If I confidently walk completely in perfectly there, they will highly toxically, explicitly say that I am absolutely just highly maliciously actively attempting entirely to completely, violently destroy him." Alexander confidently stepped significantly closer, highly aggressively forcing her entirely to intensely look completely directly entirely at him. Highly generously, let them highly pathetically explicitly say absolutely whatever they highly fiercely want. You are officially the absolute only highly genuine person entirely in exactly this entire massive city who truly profoundly knows the absolute truth. Are you officially a highly elite analyst, Elena? Or are you officially a highly pathetic victim? Fiercely choose. Elena took a massive, incredibly deep breath. The blinding fear was absolutely still, perfectly there, violently choking her. But completely perfectly beneath it was absolute, pure rage. Highly righteous. Violently burning pure rage. "I am officially an elite analyst," she whispered incredibly softly. "Good," Alexander stated. A highly rare, highly slight, beautiful smile beautifully touched his handsome lips. "Flawlessly wear absolutely something incredibly sharp. We are actively going directly to massive war." Elena is going to the boardroom to expose her ex. What kind of power outfit should she wear? Drop your suggestions below. Part 4. The Boardroom Massacre. The highly imposing conference room, entirely in sterling global, was highly meticulously designed, entirely to completely, violently intimidate. The highly massive, floor-to-ceiling windows perfectly overlooked the entire massive city, highly actively making the highly powerful people completely inside profoundly feel exactly like highly absolute gods. Julian Vanguard sat peacefully, entirely at the absolute head, entirely of the massive table, completely on the highly specific side, entirely of the highly honored guests, heavily surrounded completely by Isabella and his highly expensive elite legal team. Chloe was absolutely also perfectly there, highly technically exactly as a highly glamorous brand ambassador, but highly primarily absolutely just entirely to visually look incredibly decorative and highly pathetically stroke the highly arrogant ego entirely of Julian. They were loudly laughing, incredibly, highly confident, completely and absolutely themselves. They had highly successfully pitted Marcus Thorne completely against Alexander Sterling, highly maliciously driving the highly massive acquisition price violently directly to exactly $1.2 billion, or 1.2 billion rubles. They were highly actively entirely about to miraculously become significantly, infinitely richer than absolute God. The heavy doors smoothly opened. Alexander Sterling confidently entered. His highly terrifying energy completely, violently filled the massive room. Absolutely all highly sophisticated conversations, completely, violently, stopped highly, instantly. "Highly esteemed gentlemen," Alexander stated, highly smoothly buttoning his highly bespoke jacket. "And beautiful ladies." "Alexander," Julian confidently stood completely up, highly eagerly extending his massive hand. "Completely ready entirely to highly proudly sign? Thorne is highly frantically calling me absolutely every single exactly 5 short minutes. But I highly politely explicitly told him that I highly fiercely wanted to highly generously give you the highly absolute right entirely of absolute first refusal. Highly professional elite courtesy, highly profoundly appreciated," Alexander stated, completely, utterly ignoring the highly eager handshake. He sat heavily down perfectly at the absolute head entirely of the massive table. "However, my highly elite team has highly surprisingly encountered absolutely some highly concerning, last-minute massive questions entirely regarding the highly critical retention entirely of your highly massive user base." Julian highly dismissively laughed loudly. "The highly complex numbers highly proudly actively speak completely for absolutely themselves. Highly massive triple-digit absolute growth." "Exactly, so you highly proudly explicitly say," Alexander highly smoothly noted. "But I highly fiercely prefer entirely to clearly hear exactly it completely from my highly elite lead analyst entirely on exactly this highly massive project." Alexander highly aggressively pressed a highly secure button perfectly on the highly advanced intercom. "Highly politely invite her completely in." The highly quiet side door smoothly opened. Elena Sterling confidently entered. She flawlessly wore a highly bespoke, incredibly sharp, dark red designer suit that flawlessly fit exactly like highly impenetrable armor. Her beautiful hair incredibly sleek and highly severe. She fiercely clutched a highly advanced tablet completely to her fragile chest. She absolutely did not actively look completely down directly at the hard floor. She intensely looked completely straight directly at Julian. The hot blood completely, violently drained entirely from the handsome face entirely of Julian. Isabella completely, violently dropped her expensive pen. The arrogant mouth entirely of Chloe violently opened completely wide, flawlessly creating a highly, incredibly unattractive shape entirely of the letter O. "Elena?" Julian violently stuttered. "What exactly is this, Alexander? Is exactly this a highly toxic joke?" "Yes, she is officially his highly crazy toxic ex-girlfriend," Isabella violently screamed, frantically jumping completely up. "She was absolutely just a highly pathetic, low-level manager whom we highly rightfully fired entirely for highly pathetic incompetence." "Incompetence." Alexander smoothly raised exactly one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Incredibly funny. My highly elite HR department highly explicitly calls her an absolute wonderkind. She is completely, violently biased," Isabella violently yelled. "She is perfectly here entirely to highly maliciously sabotage the highly massive deal entirely because she is highly toxically bitter that she absolutely did not highly successfully get the highly expensive ring. Safely. Sit completely down, Mrs. Isabella." The deep voice entirely of Alexander violently snapped exactly like a highly lethal whip. "Or highly elite security will completely, violently remove you." Isabella sat heavily completely down, violently boiling completely with pure rage. "Elena," Julian stated, his deep voice highly suddenly acquiring exactly that highly mocking, condescending toxic tone. "My beautiful sweetie, exactly this is officially the highly elite major leagues. You absolutely do not completely belong perfectly here. Confidently, go successfully, get absolutely some cheap coffee completely before you completely, violently embarrass completely yourself. Elena highly gently placed the advanced tablet perfectly on the massive table and highly rapidly connected it directly to the highly massive main screen. "I am absolutely not perfectly here entirely for highly cheap coffee, Julian. I am perfectly here entirely for a highly strict audit." She highly gently touched the bright screen. A highly enormous complex graph confidently appeared. "Exactly this," Elena pointed, her beautiful voice incredibly firm and highly authoritative. "Is officially the highly proudly claimed massive revenue as entirely for the highly busy first quarter. And exactly this is officially the highly true, highly authentic log entirely of highly liquid cash deposits completely from the highly secure bank AP is." The highly bright red line perfectly on the massive graph completely, violently nosedived, completely straight, directly down. The massive room completely, violently fell entirely into highly dead, deafening silence. "You are highly illegally counting highly projected, massive renewals exactly as highly liquid cash entirely in the highly secure register," Elena highly explicitly explained, intensely looking directly at the highly terrified massive investors, perfectly on the highly specific side, entirely of Julian. "You are highly illegally using highly massive future debts entirely to highly illegally cover highly massive current operational expenses. It is officially a highly illegal Ponzi scheme, Julian. The absolute precise moment the highly massive user growth highly miraculously slows completely down, absolutely, even completely, by exactly 2%. Absolutely everything will completely, violently collapse. "She is highly maliciously lying!" Julian violently roared, highly aggressively slamming his massive hand completely on the massive table. "She highly maliciously forged exactly that." "I highly maliciously forged exactly it?" Elena, highly freezing coldly, asked. "I highly meticulously cross-referenced the highly secure shipping IDs. Exactly half entirely of your highly massive, high-volume elite clients are officially highly illegal shell companies. Highly illegally registered directly to a highly secure P.O. box, entirely in the highly secure Caymans. A highly secure P.O. box, highly officially registered directly to Isabella Consulting." She intensely looked directly at Isabella. Isabella completely, violently, turned completely pale. Alexander smoothly leaned completely back, entirely, in his expensive chair, highly elegantly steepling his strong fingers. "Highly illegal fraud. A highly strong, heavy word, Julian. But federal prison is officially a significantly stronger, highly terrifying phrase." Julian highly frantically looked completely around the massive room. His highly expensive lawyers were highly furiously, anxiously, whispering completely to absolutely each other. He profoundly realized that the highly massive trap had completely, violently, sprung completely shut. "You!" Julian violently hissed directly at Elena. "I completely created you. I highly generously gave you a beautiful life. You highly generously gave me a highly pathetic job." Elena highly smoothly corrected. "I highly successfully built my absolute own beautiful life. And exactly now, I am highly actively fixing a highly catastrophic mistake." Alexander confidently stood completely up. "The highly massive deal is completely, permanently cancelled. And Julian, I am highly urgently sending exactly this highly damning data directly to the highly strict SEC and directly to Marcus Thorne. I highly accurately assume Marcus will absolutely not be exactly as incredibly polite, exactly as I absolutely am. You absolutely cannot highly possibly actively do exactly this," Julian highly pathetically pleaded, now highly visibly sweating profusely. "Alexander, intensely listen. We can highly successfully restructure. Do absolutely not intensely listen completely to her. She is absolutely nobody." Alexander confidently walked completely around the massive table and confidently stood perfectly out completely to Elena. He highly protectively placed his massive hand perfectly on her fragile lower back. A highly protective, absolute gesture, entirely of highly absolute ownership, that violently sent a highly massive shockwave completely through the massive room. "She is officially the absolute most highly competent, beautiful person, entirely, in exactly this entire massive room," Alexander stated, his deep voice completely, utterly lethal. "And she is officially the highly anticipated future Chief Financial Officer, CFO, entirely of exactly this highly massive division. You, Julian, are officially highly pathetic, worthless inventory." Alexander highly gently guided Elena directly toward the heavy door. "Let's confidently go, Mrs. Sterling, or Lorena. We officially possess highly real, massive work entirely to actively do." They confidently left, ruthlessly leaving Julian completely alone, perfectly among the highly pathetic ruins entirely of his highly arrogant empire. Interactive question. Elena just destroyed Julian's fake company and got a promotion. How amazing is she? Drop A if you love her confidence. Part 5. The Invisible Enemy. in the highly long corridor, the absolute precise moment the heavy doors smoothly closed. The weak knees entirely of Elena finally, completely, violently buckled. She violently stumbled, but Alexander highly securely caught her, his strong grip incredibly strong, highly warm. "Actively breathe," he highly gently commanded. "I highly successfully did exactly it," she heavily exhaled, violently trembling. "I highly, genuinely, truly, highly successfully did exactly it. You were completely, utterly magnificent," Alexander stated, and entirely for the absolute first time. His piercing eyes absolutely were not highly analytically analyzing highly complex data. They were highly analytically analyzing her beautiful lips, right entirely and exactly that highly specific moment. The highly secure elevator loudly dinged. A massive man confidently stepped completely out. Marcus Thorne. He was incredibly slick, highly predatory, and beautifully smiling. "Sterling," Marcus nodded fiercely. "I highly clearly heard the highly massive deal is completely dead. What an absolute pity. I was highly eagerly looking completely forward entirely to highly ruthlessly gutting Julian." He intensely looked directly at Elena, his piercing gaze highly uncomfortably lingering. "And who exactly is exactly this highly beautiful weapon entirely of massive destruction?" "She is completely with me," Alexander stated, his deep tone completely, violently, shifting directly into highly pure, absolute territorial aggression. "Absolute territorial," Marcus laughed loudly. "Goodbye, Alexander, goodbye." The strong hand entirely of Alexander violently tightened completely on the fragile arm entirely of Elena. The highly catastrophic consequences entirely of the highly explosive boardroom massacre. Exactly as the highly elite financial blogs highly rapidly dubbed exactly it, were completely immediate and absolutely devastating entirely for Vanguard Logistics. Within exactly 48 agonizing hours, the highly anticipated IPO was completely, violently halted. The highly strict SEC highly urgently launched a highly preliminary federal investigation, and the handsome face entirely of Julian Vanguard was highly humiliatingly smeared completely across absolutely all highly prominent business newspapers. Absolutely not exactly as a highly brilliant visionary, but exactly as a highly pathetic, cautionary tale for Elena. However, the highly pathetic silence had completely, permanently ended. She sat peacefully, entirely, in her highly beautiful brand new office. A highly exclusive corner suite, perfectly on the exactly 46th floor entirely of Sterling Global. Perfectly overlooking the highly exact same massive city that had physically seemed exactly like a highly terrifying prison. Absolutely just a highly few, short agonizing weeks completely ago. The highly elegant plaque perfectly on her heavy door highly proudly read, "Director of Strategy, Massive Logistics Division." It absolutely wasn't a highly pathetic handout. It was a highly prestigious title, highly bravely earned perfectly on the highly bloody battlefield. "You are absolutely still intensely looking directly at the highly massive view," Eleanor Sterling stated, smoothly leaning completely against the highly secure glass door, highly peacefully sipping a highly dark espresso that visually looked significantly darker than her absolute own highly terrifying soul. "It is completely inefficient. The highly beautiful view absolutely does not highly successfully generate highly massive revenue." Elena smoothly turned completely around, beautifully smiling, incredibly weakly. She had highly successfully learned that the highly freezing harshness entirely of Eleanor was officially her highly unique, beautiful language, entirely of pure love. I am absolutely not intensely looking. I am highly, deeply thinking entirely about the highly extravagant ball exactly tonight. Alexander is highly aggressively insisting that I highly proudly attend. He absolutely is not highly aggressively insisting, Eleanor highly smoothly corrected. Confidently entering and highly casually throwing a highly expensive garment bag completely onto the comfortable sofa. He is highly aggressively commanding, and he is completely 100% right. Exactly tonight is officially a highly terrifying Shark Tank. Julian will absolutely be perfectly there, highly desperately attempting entirely to miraculously save his highly pathetic reputation. Marcus Thorne will absolutely be perfectly there, highly maliciously attempting entirely to highly illegally steal absolutely ours. You highly desperately need to visually look exactly as if you highly legally own the highly deep water. Absolutely not, absolutely just highly pathetically swim perfectly in exactly it. Elena intensely looked directly at the highly expensive garment bag. I officially possess a highly beautiful dress. You officially possess a highly massive closet completely full, entirely of highly sensible, boring corporate attire that loudly screams highly pathetic middle management. Eleanor highly toxically scoffed. Alexander highly specially brought exactly this, directly from highly exclusive Milan. Do absolutely not highly pathetically ask the highly exorbitant price. It is incredibly vulgar entirely to highly actively discuss massive money that we highly clearly, highly abundantly possess. Eleanor highly smoothly unzipped the highly expensive garment bag. It was an absolute, flawless masterpiece, entirely of highly deep navy blue velvet and highly pure silver threads, highly meticulously designed entirely to beautifully resemble a highly starry, beautiful night sky. It was incredibly elegant, highly powerful, and completely, undeniably, sexy. He highly specifically chose exactly this? Elena softly asked, her pale cheeks violently flushing highly bright red. He officially possesses highly excellent eyes, Elena, Eleanor highly dryly stated, and entirely despite his highly terrifying, arrogant behavior, completely lately, he highly apparently actively seems entirely to highly exclusively use them highly, primarily, completely on you. Elena is getting a designer dress chosen by Alexander. Do you think they are going to become a couple? Tell us your thoughts below. Part 6. The Final Strike. The highly exclusive Crimson Ball was highly beautifully held entirely in a highly massive gallery. An enormous, breathtaking hall, completely packed, completely with highly powerful billionaires, highly influential politicians, and highly desperate social climbers who highly aggressively, actively hunted them. The heavy air violently vibrated completely with the highly beautiful sounds entirely of highly elegant string quartets and the highly toxic whispers entirely of elite gossip. When Elena confidently arrived perfectly on the strong arm entirely of Alexander, the massive hall absolutely didn't entirely just completely violently fall completely silent. It actively seemed to highly literally take a highly massive, collective breath. Alexander Sterling was flawlessly wearing a highly bespoke tuxedo that flawlessly fit exactly like a highly perfect second skin. But his piercing eyes were completely, violently, glued, highly exclusively, completely, to Elena. He highly confidently led her completely through the highly massive crowd, fiercely holding his strong hand perfectly on her fragile, bare back. A highly tactile, absolute barrier, completely from the entire massive world. Actively breathe. Alexander whispered incredibly softly, perfectly into her delicate ear, violently sending highly freezing shivers completely down her fragile spine. You visually look incredibly dangerous. I highly absolutely love exactly it. Absolutely everyone is highly intensely staring, Elena softly murmured, fiercely clutching her highly expensive clutch exactly like a highly lethal weapon. Highly generously, let them, Alexander smoothly replied. They are highly frantically, actively attempting entirely to highly successfully figure completely out exactly who you truly are. My highly glamorous mistress, or my highly terrifying gray eminence. Let them highly frantically guess on the absolute other, highly distant side entirely of the massive hall. Julian Vanguard was highly pathetically giving a highly pathetic audience. Exactly, although his highly toxic circle was significantly, infinitely smaller than highly usual. He visually looked completely, utterly exhausted. The highly massive stress, completely from the highly catastrophic failed acquisition, and the highly terrifying impending federal investigation, had highly deeply cut, highly visible wrinkles completely around his piercing eyes. Chloe was highly pathetically hanging completely on him, visually looking incredibly bored, and highly furiously actively typing entirely on her expensive phone. Highly likely, highly actively live streaming her highly glamorous elite evening. When Julian vividly saw Elena, he completely stopped entirely mid-sentence. He completely, violently dropped his expensive drink. Is exactly that officially Elena? Chloe asked, her toxic voice highly annoyingly carrying completely over the beautiful music. Why exactly is she flawlessly wearing exactly that? It absolutely must be highly pathetically rented. Julian completely ignored her. He highly aggressively marched completely across the massive hall. His handsome face a highly toxic mask, entirely of highly desperate, toxic entitlement. He highly aggressively intercepted Elena and Alexander perfectly at the highly massive champagne fountain. "Elena," Julian stated, his deep voice incredibly tense. "You highly successfully possess the highly massive audacity entirely to highly proudly show your beautiful face perfectly here, completely after the highly pathetic, toxic stunt you highly maliciously pulled." "Good, highly beautiful evening, Julian," Elena stated incredibly freezing coldly. "I highly accurately assume that the highly pathetic stunt was highly simply highly accurate. Perfect bookkeeping. You absolutely should highly bravely try exactly it, absolutely sometime. You completely, violently ruined me," Julian violently hissed, smoothly leaning significantly closer, completely ignoring the highly violently darkened beautiful expression entirely of Alexander. The highly strict SEC is violently breathing completely down my fragile neck. The highly massive investors are frantically fleeing. You highly desperately need to highly publicly issue a highly official retraction. Highly explicitly say that you were completely mistaken. Highly explicitly say that you were highly toxically emotional. She will absolutely do absolutely nothing entirely of the highly pathetic sort. Alexander confidently stepped completely forward, his highly imposing height completely, violently, dwarfing Julian. And exactly if you highly aggressively approach absolutely, even exactly one single microscopic centimeter, significantly, closer, completely, to my highly elite director of strategy, I will highly aggressively order elite security entirely to completely, violently remove you completely through the highly pathetic kitchen entrance. She is officially my highly pathetic ex-girlfriend," Julian violently snapped, I intimately know her. She is incredibly soft. She absolutely does not successfully possess the highly strong stomach entirely for exactly this, Alexander. She is absolutely just a highly pathetic back-end coder. Absolutely not a highly elite player. He smoothly returned his piercing gaze completely back directly to Elena, highly desperately attempting entirely to miraculously summon exactly that highly old, toxic charm. L, confidently come completely on. We were exactly once a highly perfect team. Do absolutely not highly generously let him highly maliciously use you entirely to completely, violently destroy me. Confidently return completely back directly to Vanguard Logistics. I will highly generously give you a highly massive raise. I will absolutely even highly successfully make you a highly true official partner exactly this highly specific time. It was a highly desperate, completely pathetic, massive attempt entirely at absolute salvation. Elena intensely looked directly at the exact man, completely with whom she had highly pathetically wasted exactly 4 agonizing years. She vividly saw the highly cold sweat perfectly on his pale forehead, the blinding fear entirely in his piercing eyes. She profoundly felt absolutely nothing, absolutely only a highly distant, clinical, pathetic pity. I absolutely already am a highly official partner, Julian, Elena stated incredibly softly, in Sterling Global, and completely, utterly, unlike you. Alexander absolutely does not highly desperately need me entirely to highly pathetically fix his highly catastrophic mistakes. He highly desperately needs me entirely to highly miraculously build his highly massive future. She is highly maliciously lying, Chloe violently intervened. Confidently, stepping significantly closer and highly toxically looking completely up and completely down, entirely at Elena, completely with absolute disdain. You are absolutely just a highly pathetic replacement employee. Julian will highly successfully violently bounce completely back. We are highly aggressively launching a highly massive crypto token exactly next highly anticipated week. Vanguard coin. It is actively going to absolutely be completely, utterly enormous. Elena laughed loudly. It was a highly genuine, highly bright, beautiful sound that completely, violently startled them. Vanguard coin? Oh, Julian, you are highly genuinely, completely, utterly desperate. Before Julian could completely, violently explode, a highly dark shadow violently fell completely over the highly tense group. Marcus Thorne had highly confidently arrived. Marcus was an absolute, highly terrifying man who actively seemed to absolutely be highly brutally carved, completely from solid granite, and highly evil, toxic intentions. He flawlessly wore a highly striking white tuxedo jacket, a highly bold, massive choice that highly clearly signaled that he absolutely was not violently afraid entirely of absolutely any highly pathetic stains, nor absolutely any highly toxic judgment. Alexander, Marcus nodded fiercely, his piercing eyes smoothly sliding completely to Elena. And the highly famous Elena Sterling, or Lorena. I absolutely must explicitly say, the highly complex financial audits that you highly successfully executed were absolute, pure poetry. Highly brutal, violently violent, pure poetry. Marcus, Alexander highly coldly acknowledged, his strong body completely, violently tensing. I am perfectly here, absolutely only entirely, to highly politely express my highly sincere condolences completely to Mr. Vanguard. Marcus beautifully smiled, flawlessly showing way too incredibly many highly sharp teeth. I highly clearly heard. The highly valuable price entirely of your highly pathetic shares highly catastrophically hit an absolute 52-week massive low exactly today. I am highly aggressively buying. Absolutely, of course. Completely, entirely, in highly liquid cash. Confidently go directly to highly absolute hell, Thorne, Julian violently spat. Highly, roughly, fiercely grabbing Chloe completely by her soft arm. We are actively leaving, while Julian highly violently dragged the highly loudly protesting Chloe completely away. Marcus smoothly shifted his absolute, entire, highly intense attention completely directly to Elena. You profoundly know, Elena. Exactly such highly massive talent, exactly as absolutely yours, is completely, tragically wasted, entirely on a highly pathetic, sinking ship exactly like Vanguard. And highly completely honestly, Sterling Global is way too incredibly, highly conservative. My highly massive company, Northern Star, highly generously rewards absolute aggression. Highly proudly name your highly massive price. She is absolutely not entirely for highly pathetic sale, Marcus, Alexander stated, his deep voice incredibly low and highly dangerous. Absolutely everything is officially entirely for highly pathetic sale, Alexander. Marcus laughed loudly. It is absolutely only a highly simple matter entirely of highly correct currency. He highly, slightly, beautifully bowed completely to Elena. Highly, deeply think entirely about exactly it. I highly, fiercely promise. I absolutely do not highly strictly require my highly elite executives entirely to flawlessly wear highly expensive velvet, entirely to highly strategically distract highly intense attention completely from highly boring balance sheets. He confidently walked completely away, ruthlessly leaving a highly freezing chill entirely in the heavy air. He is actively going to confidently come directly after us, Elena stated incredibly quietly. Highly generously let him, Alexander stated, gently taking her soft hand and highly safely placing it perfectly on his strong elbow. You are completely with me. Absolute checkmate is completely, utterly inevitable. Marcus Thorne just tried to poach Elena. Do you think she should stay with Alexander or start her own company? Tell us below. Epilogue. The ultimate algorithm. The highly agonizing weeks completely following the highly exclusive ball were an absolute, highly blurry blur, entirely of highly high stakes, elite corporate maneuvers. Elena highly flawlessly led the highly massive restructuring entirely of the highly complex North American transport routes, entirely of Sterling. A highly massive project officially valued entirely at exactly hundreds entirely of highly massive millions. She was completely brilliant, completely tireless, and entirely for the absolute first time, entirely in her entire massive life, completely, utterly appreciated entirely to her highly absolute, true, massive worth. But the highly terrifying enemy, absolutely, was not entirely only completely outside the highly secure gates. He was highly secretly crawling completely inside. Isabella, highly violently facing the highly catastrophic collapse entirely of her highly pathetic consulting firm, entirely due completely to the highly toxic scandal, completely with Julian. Highly secretly contacted Marcus Thorne. She successfully possessed absolutely zero highly loyal loyalty. Absolutely only a highly toxic instinct entirely for highly pathetic survival. Marcus highly generously gave her a highly simple, toxic task. Highly successfully find highly toxic dirt completely on Elena. Completely, violently destroy her highly pristine credibility. And the highly strict SEC investigation entirely into Julian. Entirely in which Isabella was highly illegally implicated, will completely, violently lose its absolute main highly critical witness. Critical. Isabella profoundly knew the highly secure private passwords entirely of Elena. She profoundly knew her highly old, pathetic email accounts. She profoundly knew the highly beautiful maiden name entirely of her loving mother. On highly quiet Wednesday, Elena confidently arrived entirely at her massive office, absolutely only, entirely. To highly shockingly find Eleanor highly anxiously waiting completely for her, heavily surrounded completely by exactly 2 highly imposing internal security officers. The heavy atmosphere was completely suffocating. "Eleanor?" Elena violently dropped her expensive bag. "What exactly is highly actively happening?" "We highly successfully found a highly toxic leak," Eleanor stated, her beautiful voice violently trembling incredibly slightly. Absolutely something that Elena had absolutely never, ever clearly heard completely before. Highly confidential, massive data entirely about the highly anticipated merger, completely according directly to the highly secret Tokyo agreement, was highly illegally sent directly to the highly secure private server entirely of Marcus Thorne. Exactly last highly dark night at exactly 3 a.m. Elena deeply frowned. Okay. Then highly aggressively track the highly specific IP. Highly successfully find the highly toxic mole. "We absolutely already did," Eleanor stated, fiercely holding a highly damning printout. "It confidentially came highly directly completely from your highly secure terminal, Elena. Highly illegally using your highly unique encryption key. The massive room completely, violently spun. Exactly that is completely, medically impossible. I was peacefully sleeping. She completely, violently stopped. She absolutely could not highly openly explicitly say that she was completely with Alexander. They had highly beautifully spent the absolute entire highly dark night, highly intimately talking. Absolutely, just highly, passionately talking entirely in his luxury penthouse. Peacefully falling deeply asleep, perfectly on the comfortable sofa, highly meticulously reviewing highly complex contracts. But highly openly admitting exactly that would highly pathetically visually look exactly as if she were highly toxically sleeping completely with him, entirely for highly pathetic protection. "I absolutely did not highly actively do exactly that," Elena stated incredibly firmly. "Absolutely someone highly maliciously forged my highly secure credentials. The highly secure logs are completely, highly encoded," the highly imposing head of security stated highly apologetically. "Mrs. Sterling, or Lorena, we absolutely must highly officially suspend your highly secure access completely until a highly thorough, complete forensic audit is highly successfully conducted. Highly standard corporate protocol. Do you genuinely, arrogantly think I am an absolute, highly pathetic traitor?" Elena intensely looked directly at Eleanor. "Highly betrayed. I highly genuinely think you are incredibly smart," Eleanor stated, her piercing eyes incredibly hard. "Incredibly smart, completely enough, entirely, to highly actively play absolutely both highly massive sides. I highly seriously warned Alexander that you were highly pathetic baggage. Where exactly is he? Elena violently demanded. In a highly important meeting completely with the highly elite Japanese delegation. He absolutely does not completely know completely yet. I am highly actively handling exactly this. Eleanor highly aggressively pointed directly at the heavy door. Confidently, go, completely home, Elena. Do absolutely not highly actively log completely in. Do absolutely not highly urgently call absolutely anyone. Elena was highly humiliatingly escorted completely out, entirely of the massive building, exactly like a highly pathetic criminal. Standing perfectly on the freezing sidewalk, she vividly saw a highly sleek black sedan safely parked completely across the busy street. The highly tinted window smoothly rolled completely down. Isabella sat peacefully entirely in the highly luxurious back seat, flawlessly wearing highly oversized designer sunglasses. She highly slowly lowered them, highly toxically winked. And the expensive car completely, violently sped completely away. The expensive phone entirely of Elena violently vibrated. A highly secure message completely from a highly unknown number. Absolute karma. Absolutely isn't exactly it completely, utterly beautiful? To absolute hell completely with exactly this. Elena absolutely did not confidently go completely home. She confidently went directly to the absolute, only highly specific place entirely, of which she could highly possibly actively, deeply think. A highly small, cheap internet cafe, entirely in highly modest Queens, or Bibi Revo. The highly exact same exactly, one that she highly frequently visited entirely in elite university. She highly secretly bought a highly cheap, disposable laptop, completely with highly liquid cash. She profoundly knew that she absolutely had not highly actively sent the highly confidential files, which highly explicitly meant that absolutely someone highly successfully possessed highly illegal remote access for exactly 6 agonizing hours. Elena absolutely did not highly actively behave exactly like a highly elite chief strategy officer. She highly aggressively acted exactly like the highly brilliant, terrifying, coding wunderkind, completely from highly elite university, that she truly, genuinely was. She highly aggressively tracked the highly complex packet headers entirely of the highly stolen massive data. She highly illegally bypassed the highly impenetrable firewall entirely of Sterling Global. A highly impossible feat that absolutely should have absolutely been completely impossible. Entirely to highly successfully gain highly absolute access directly to the highly raw server logs. She highly successfully found the highly massive anomaly. The highly confidential data absolutely had not been highly actively sent completely from her highly secure terminal. They had absolutely been highly maliciously rerouted completely through her highly secure terminal, completely from an absolute external massive source. A highly toxic source, highly illegally using a highly outdated, pathetic backdoor key. A highly secure key that highly officially belonged completely to Vanguard Logistics. Julian and Isabella had highly illegally used a highly old, secure link directly to a highly secure shared server that she had highly efficiently set completely up. Agonizing years completely ago. Entirely for a highly joint corporate project. A highly secure link that she had highly tragically, completely forgotten. Entirely to completely, violently. Sever entirely in the highly massive chaos, entirely of the highly toxic breakup. They had highly maliciously framed her. She was highly actively, entirely, about to highly safely save the highly undeniable evidence exactly when her bright screen completely, violently went pitch black. A highly toxic message confidentially appeared entirely in bright green text. Highly excellent, pathetic attempt, Elena. But exactly now, the highly secure network, highly legally, belongs completely to us. VN. Marcus Thorne. He was highly actively, brutally working completely with Julian. Exactly this absolutely wasn't entirely just highly toxic revenge. Exactly this was a highly hostile, massive corporate takeover. Elena violently slammed the cheap laptop completely shut. She highly desperately needed Alexander, but she absolutely could not highly urgently call him. His expensive phone was highly likely, absolutely, also, completely, violently hacked. She violently ran completely out directly into the freezing rain, frantically catching a highly cheap taxi. Sterling Tower, highly, rapidly. When she confidently arrived, the highly massive lobby was completely, violently, entirely, in absolute chaos. Elite security highly aggressively attempted entirely to violently stop her. I highly desperately need entirely to vividly see the highly elite CEO, Elena loudly screamed, completely soaking wet and highly frantic. Mrs. Sterling, or Lorena, you are highly officially banned completely from the highly exclusive premises, the massive guard loudly yelled, fiercely grabbing her soft arm. Gently let her completely go. The highly terrifying deep voice loudly echoed completely across the highly polished marble hall. Alexander confidently stood perfectly at the absolute top entirely of the highly massive escalators. He visually looked completely, utterly furious. Absolutely not completely at her, but completely at the absolute entire massive world. He violently ran completely down the highly steep stairs, highly aggressively jumping completely over exactly 2 steep steps, entirely at a highly massive time. Alexander, they highly maliciously framed me, Elena violently cried, completely ignoring the highly shocked stares entirely of the highly elite staff. It was a highly outdated secure link, Julian and Marcus. I completely know, Alexander stated, highly intimately pulling her completely into his strong arms. Perfectly sight. Exactly there, entirely in the highly massive lobby. Completely, flawlessly soaking his highly expensive bespoke suit completely with her highly wet, freezing clothes. I completely know, Elena. You completely know? She violently pulled completely away, intensely looking directly at him. Eleanor highly confidently showed me the highly secure logs, Alexander grimly stated. She highly genuinely thought it was highly undeniable, proof entirely of your highly toxic guilt. I highly meticulously looked completely at the highly precise timestamps. At exactly 3 a.m., you were peacefully sleeping completely on my broad shoulder. I profoundly know exactly where you absolutely were. He smoothly turned directly toward the massive guard. Highly urgently restore her highly secure credentials completely immediately. And highly urgently call my highly terrifying sister directly down perfectly here. But the highly elite board of directors, the massive guard violently stuttered. I officially am the highly elite board of directors, Alexander violently growled. He highly gently took the beautiful face entirely of Elena, completely into his strong hands. They highly desperately attempted entirely to highly maliciously use you entirely to highly successfully get directly to me. They highly catastrophically committed a highly fatal, massive mistake. What exact fatal mistake? Elena softly asked, her massive heart violently pounding. They highly maliciously made exactly it incredibly personal, Alexander stated, Exactly now we are absolutely not entirely just actively going entirely to highly successfully defeat them. We are actively going to completely, violently bury them. The highly massive counterattack was incredibly rapid and completely, utterly merciless, with the highly massive resources entirely of Alexander and the highly intimate, profound knowledge entirely of Elena, entirely of the highly complex internal systems, entirely of Julian. They absolutely didn't entirely, just highly bravely defend completely themselves. They completely, violently dismantled. Elena highly aggressively spent the highly agonizing following 24 agonizing hours entirely in the highly secure war room, a highly safe, impenetrable bunker, completely deep, perfectly beneath Sterling Global. She highly successfully tracked the highly unauthorized, illegal access completely back directly to the highly specific IP address entirely of Isabella. But she highly successfully found significantly more. She highly successfully found highly secure emails, completely between Julian and Marcus Thorne, highly illegally, actively discussing highly illegal price fixing. It was completely, utterly illegal. Highly, incredibly illegal. We highly successfully caught them, Elena stated, highly exhaustedly rubbing her highly tired eyes. The highly strict RICO Act, highly illegal corporate espionage, highly illegal wire fraud. Absolutely everything is perfectly right, perfectly here. Arthur is highly actively preparing the highly official depositions right exactly now, Alexander stated, gently placing a hot cup entirely of cheap tea perfectly in front, entirely of her. He hadn't actively left her fragile side entirely for a highly single massive step. But we highly desperately need to flawlessly deliver the highly absolute final fatal blow, highly publicly. Julian is highly proudly launching his highly pathetic Vanguard coin exactly today, entirely at a highly massive press conference. He highly arrogantly, genuinely thinks he is highly actively transitioning completely into highly advanced crypto entirely to miraculously save the massive company. He is highly illegally using the highly pathetic remaining liquidity entirely of the highly pathetic firm entirely to highly illegally back the highly pathetic coin. Elena completely, profoundly understood, intensely looking directly at the highly complex data streams. If the highly pathetic coin completely violently crashes, the massive company will completely violently become completely insolvent, completely immediately. Exactly. Alexander smiled highly freezing coldly. And who exactly is significantly better, entirely, to highly eloquently explain highly complex market volatility than exactly you? The highly exclusive press conference entirely of Vanguard Logistics was highly beautifully held, entirely in a highly expensive rented warehouse, entirely in highly trendy Brooklyn, or Red October. Highly meticulously styled, entirely to visually look incredibly rustic and highly advanced. Julian confidently stood perfectly on the massive stage, flawlessly wearing a highly simple black turtleneck, highly pathetically mimicking Steve Jobs, but actively sounding exactly like a highly pathetic sinner entirely in a highly holy church. Chloe was perfectly right, perfectly next, completely to him, highly proudly showing completely off a highly cheap t-shirt, completely with the highly pathetic logo, entirely of the highly pathetic cryptocurrency. Vanguard coin is officially the massive future, Julian loudly screamed directly to the highly massive crowd, entirely of highly illegally paid influencers and highly skeptical, elite journalists. It is highly securely backed completely by the highly reliable, massive infrastructure entirely of Vanguard logistics. In highly absolute fact, a highly clear, beautiful voice, highly flawlessly amplified completely by the highly active microphone, violently cut completely through the massive room. It is highly illegally backed completely by highly toxic debts and highly illegally stolen algorithms. The highly gigantic screen completely behind Julian violently blinked. The highly pathetic logo entirely of Vanguard coin completely, permanently disappeared, flawlessly replaced completely by a highly clear, live broadcast entirely of Elena peacefully sitting entirely in the highly secure war room, entirely of Alexander. "Elena!" Julian violently screamed. Highly aggressively cut the highly secure broadcast. Completely cut. Exactly it. You absolutely cannot highly possibly cut the absolute truth, Julian, Elena stated incredibly calmly, completely from the bright screen. I literally just highly successfully uploaded the highly authentic real-time balance sheet entirely of Vanguard Logistics directly to the highly public blockchain. Absolutely every single highly elite investor can highly clearly, vividly see. You officially possess exactly $4,000 entirely in highly liquid assets and exactly $400 million entirely in highly toxic debts. The massive room completely, violently exploded. Highly aggressive journalists highly frantically checked their expensive phones. The highly valuable stock ticker entirely of Vanguard Logistics, highly clearly visible, perfectly on the highly massive side screens, aggressively began to completely, violently plummet. Exactly this is a highly malicious lie, Isabella loudly screamed completely from the absolute first front row. She highly illegally hacked us. And perfectly right exactly here, Elena aggressively continued, completely, utterly relentless, is officially a highly undeniable, authentic recording entirely of a highly secure call completely between Isabella and Marcus Thorne, highly officially dated exactly 2 short days completely prior. The highly clear audio loudly played. Simply highly secretly, plant the highly toxic file completely on the highly secure computer entirely of Elena, as incredibly soon, exactly as she is completely, violently discredited. Julian will highly easily successfully liquidate the highly massive pension fund completely before the highly strict SSEC completely, violently freeze exactly it, freezes. Isabella completely, violently froze. The highly massive crowd completely, violently turned completely against her. The highly blinding flashes entirely of the expensive cameras violently exploded exactly like highly lethal gunshots. Marcus Thorne highly desperately attempted entirely to highly expensively buy a highly pathetic corpse, Elena stated. And Julian Vanguard highly desperately attempted entirely to highly illegally sell absolutely all entirely of you, a highly terrifying ghost. On the massive stage, Julian visually looked incredibly, highly small. His highly arrogant fake facade completely, violently cracked. He highly frantically looked directly at Chloe entirely for highly pathetic support. But Chloe was absolutely already highly frantically retreating, highly furiously actively typing entirely on her expensive phone. Highly likely a highly public breakup statement. It is completely, permanently over, Julian, Elena stated incredibly softly. The highly strict federal prosecutors are highly impatiently waiting perfectly at the highly quiet back entrance. Exactly as if highly perfectly on highly official cue. The highly heavy doors violently burst completely wide open. Highly severe federal agents entirely in highly official windbreakers violently stormed completely into the highly massive premises. The highly secure live broadcast completely, violently cut. In the highly secure war room, highly peaceful silence completely reigned. The highly brutal work was completely done. The highly terrifying dragon had absolutely been completely, violently slain. Elena heavily collapsed completely into her comfortable chair. The highly massive adrenaline completely draining completely away. She profoundly felt a highly warm hand perfectly on her fragile shoulder. "You are completely, utterly terrifying," Eleanor stated, confidently standing perfectly in the heavy doorway. "Absolutely never, ever, entirely in my entire massive life have I absolutely been so incredibly, highly attracted completely to the highly absolute competence entirely of a highly elite colleague." Elena laughed loudly. Completely from her. Exactly that was an absolute, highly massive compliment. Exactly that is officially a highly formal marriage proposal, Alexander joked, confidently entering. "Eleanor, highly generously give us exactly 1 short minute." Eleanor nodded fiercely. A highly rare, beautiful expression entirely of highly absolute respect, perfectly on her beautiful face, and highly quietly closed the heavy door. Alexander smoothly pulled a highly comfortable chair significantly closer, completely to Elena. "It is completely, permanently over. Marcus Thorne is absolutely already highly frantically distancing completely himself, highly maliciously claiming that he was highly illegally deceived completely by Isabella. He absolutely will not highly arrogantly touch us entirely for a highly incredibly long massive time." "And Julian?" Elena softly asked. "Under highly strict federal arrest, absolute bail will absolutely be highly strictly denied, highly explicitly considering the highly severe flight risk directly to the highly secure Caymans that you highly successfully discovered," Alexander stated. He confidently reached completely out, highly gently tucking a highly beautiful strand entirely of dark hair completely behind her delicate ear. "You highly miraculously saved the massive company, Elena, completely again. I simply highly efficiently cleaned completely up my absolute own highly toxic mess," she whispered incredibly softly. "No," Alexander stated incredibly firmly. "You highly proudly stated your highly absolute massive value. You absolutely are not a highly pathetic, outdated code, Elena. You are officially the highly brilliant source code." The highly explosive tension that had highly agonizingly accumulated completely between them, entirely for agonizing months, completely through highly exhausting late nights, highly intimate shared coffees, and highly brutal corporate war, finally, completely, violently, broke. Elena intensely looked directly at his handsome lips. "Is exactly this highly officially appropriate, entirely in the highly strict workplace?" "I highly legally own the massive building," Alexander murmured, smoothly leaning completely in. "I highly officially set the highly strict rules." He highly passionately kissed her. It absolutely was not highly pathetically hesitant. It was a highly powerful, massive merger entirely of highly absolute equals. It was incredibly passionate, highly demanding, and completely full entirely of highly beautiful promises that confidently went completely, infinitely, beyond highly complex corporate business. Elena completely, beautifully dissolved completely into him. Finally, highly peacefully letting completely go. Entirely of the highly heavy armor she had highly bravely worn, entirely for so incredibly, highly long. She absolutely wasn't a highly pathetic ex-girlfriend. She absolutely wasn't a highly pathetic victim. She was officially the absolute, undisputed victor. But exactly when they finally completely separated, heavily panting, the expensive phone entirely of Alexander violently buzzed. He intensely looked directly at it and deeply frowned. "What exactly is it?" Elena asked, highly gently tracing the sharp line entirely of his handsome jaw. "A highly secure message completely from my highly respected Uncle Arthur," Alexander stated entirely in massive confusion. He explicitly says that perfectly in the highly massive lobby, perfectly, there is absolutely someone highly actively asking entirely about you. Absolutely someone who highly arrogantly claims entirely to absolutely be your highly legal husband. Elena completely, violently froze. "I successfully possess absolutely no highly legal husband." He highly explicitly says his highly official name is officially Marcus Vanguard, or Yuri Titov, Alexander read. The highly estranged, highly toxic brother entirely of Julian. And he highly arrogantly says that he highly legally owns exactly 51% entirely of the highly massive voting rights that you literally just highly successfully brought completely back. The piercing eyes entirely of Elena completely, violently, widened. The highly toxic past absolutely was not completely, permanently over. It had literally just highly maliciously brought highly toxic reinforcements. The highly massive lobby entirely of Sterling Global was an absolute massive cathedral entirely of highly peaceful silence. Violently broken, absolutely only completely, by the highly sharp, angry tapping entirely of the highly expensive shoes, entirely of Alexander highly aggressively marching directly toward the highly imposing reception desk. Elena confidently followed incredibly closely, perfectly on his highly expensive heels. Standing perfectly at the highly advanced security turnstiles was a highly massive man who visually looked exactly like a highly rough, completely unpolished, highly toxic version entirely of Julian. Marcus Vanguard flawlessly wore a highly cheap leather jacket that had highly clearly, vividly seen significantly better massive decades. And entirely in his piercing eyes perfectly, there was a highly reckless, terrifying gleam that had absolutely never, ever highly existed entirely in the highly cowardly, pathetic gaze entirely of Julian. "Marcus!" Elena heavily breathed, completely stopping exactly a highly few short meters completely away. "What exactly is exactly this? What exactly do you highly arrogantly mean completely by highly legal husband?" Marcus smirked highly toxically, highly aggressively throwing a highly thick, bound legal document completely onto the highly polished marble counter. "Hello, my highly beautiful wifey. I am incredibly sorry that I highly tragically missed the highly anticipated anniversary. I was way too incredibly highly busy, actively being highly toxically boycotted, completely by my highly arrogant dear brother." Alexander confidently stood perfectly right, perfectly between them, highly aggressively radiating a highly freezing, lethal, absolute threat. "You officially possess exactly 10 short seconds entirely to highly logically explain completely before I highly aggressively order you entirely to absolutely be completely, violently removed, completely, forever." "Highly peacefully relax, Mr. Billionaire," Marcus stated, highly mockingly raising his massive hands entirely in highly fake, pathetic surrender. "I am absolutely not perfectly here, entirely to highly arrogantly demand highly legal marital rights. I am perfectly here, entirely, to highly explicitly tell you that my highly toxic brother is absolutely, even significantly more highly despicable than you highly possibly genuinely think. He highly aggressively pointed directly at the highly thick document. Exactly 5 agonizing years completely ago, Julian highly desperately needed a highly secure guarantor entirely for a highly high-risk, massive loan completely from a highly shady bank, highly illegally connected, completely to a highly dangerous cartel entirely in massive Macau. He absolutely could not highly possibly use his absolute own highly famous name. And he absolutely could not highly possibly ask you, Elena, because you would highly intelligently have highly meticulously read the highly fine print. Elena confidently stepped completely past Alexander and highly aggressively snatched the highly thick document, her soft hands violently trembling exactly as she frantically flipped completely through it. It was officially a highly official marriage certificate, highly officially dated exactly 5 agonizing years, completely prior. Highly exclusive Las Vegas, highly officially signed completely by Elena Sterling and Marcus Vanguard. I absolutely never, ever highly actively signed exactly this, Elena whispered incredibly softly, entirely, in absolute horror. I was actively entirely in freezing Boston, entirely in exactly that highly busy weekend, entirely for a highly important supply chain conference. I completely know, Marcus stated, and I was actively entirely in a highly secure rehab center. Julian highly illegally forged absolutely both our highly official signatures. He highly illegally used my highly pathetic identity entirely because I was officially the highly pathetic black sheep. If the highly massive loan highly catastrophically failed, the highly ruthless debt collectors would highly violently come directly after me, absolutely not highly actively after him. And he highly illegally listed you exactly as the highly official spouse, entirely to highly illegally tie your highly pristine, excellent credit rating directly to the highly massive loan. That is completely, utterly illegal fraud, Arthur stated, highly quietly, confidently appearing completely from perfectly behind them, highly meticulously adjusting his highly expensive glasses. Highly classic textbook criminal fraud. It complete gets significantly, infinitely better, Marcus stated, his handsome expression completely, violently darkening. Exactly that highly massive loan absolutely was not entirely for the highly pathetic company. It was entirely to highly illegally pay a highly massive gambling debt that he highly foolishly racked completely up, highly illegally, betting completely against his absolute own, highly pathetic early startup. He highly illegally BAT completely against you, Elena. He highly maliciously BAT that you would completely, catastrophically fail. Elena physically felt exactly as if absolutely all the heavy air completely, violently abandoned her burning lungs. The highly toxic betrayal absolutely wasn't entirely just completely professional. It was completely, utterly fundamental. Julian absolutely didn't entirely just highly maliciously use her. He was highly actively betting completely on her highly absolute destruction, completely from the absolute first massive day. Why exactly are you perfectly here, right exactly now? Alexander sharply asked, his deep voice incredibly low, his strong hand highly protectively resting perfectly on the fragile shoulder entirely of Elena. Because the highly massive loan is officially due, Marcus stated incredibly grimly. And exactly since Julian is officially completely under highly strict federal arrest, the highly aggressive bank, And completely by highly aggressive bank, I explicitly mean the highly terrifying triad, is highly actively searching entirely for the highly official, next entirely of kin. Exactly that is officially U.S., Elena. We highly legally owe them exactly $20 million, or 20 million rubles. Or they will highly aggressively actively begin entirely to completely, violently break weak legs. I will highly happily pay exactly it, Alexander stated completely immediately. Arthur, highly urgently transfer the highly massive funds. No, Elena stated. Her beautiful voice was incredibly quiet, but it completely, violently, stopped Arthur completely, dead perfectly in his tracks. Elena! Alexander smoothly turned directly toward her, his piercing eyes highly pathetically pleading. Exactly. This is incredibly dangerous. Highly generously let me, highly successfully safely take absolute care entirely of exactly this. It is absolutely just highly pathetic pocket change entirely for me. No, Alexander. Elena slowly looked completely up, her piercing gaze violently burning completely with a highly fierce, freezing light. Julian highly maliciously created exactly this highly toxic debt. Julian highly illegally forged exactly this highly toxic bond. If you highly expensively pay, he highly successfully wins. He absolutely still highly toxically controls my beautiful life. She smoothly turned directly toward Marcus. You highly explicitly said you officially possess exactly 51% entirely of the highly massive voting rights, entirely of Vanguard Logistics. I absolutely do, Marcus nodded fiercely. I highly illegally stole the highly physical stock certificates completely from his highly secure private safe entirely, while the highly strict feds were highly aggressively searching his massive office. I highly logically decided exactly that was officially my highly rightful inheritance. Gently give them completely to me, Elena violently commanded. Highly legally transfer the highly massive voting rights completely to Emmy. I will completely, violently dissolve Vanguard Logistics. I will completely, violently liquidate absolutely every single cheap chair, absolutely every single server, absolutely every single pathetic paperclip. I will highly successfully use the highly massive assets entirely to highly legally pay the highly massive debt. And I will completely, violently burn the highly pathetic company completely back directly to the highly cold ash. You would completely, violently destroy the highly brilliant work entirely of your entire massive life? Marcus asked, completely, utterly impressed. The highly brilliant work entirely of my entire massive life is completely, safely, securely inside my brilliant head. Elena gently touched her delicate temple. Vanguard Logistics is absolutely just a highly pathetic monument, completely to a highly toxic liar. I am completely, violently tearing exactly it completely down. Alexander intensely looked directly at her, and the highly massive pride entirely on his handsome face was completely, utterly blinding. Exactly that is officially my beautiful girl, he whispered incredibly softly. The highly massive liquidation entirely of Vanguard Logistics absolutely wasn't a highly sad funeral. It was an absolute, highly brutal exorcism. Elena brutally worked completely with a highly terrifying ruthlessness that completely, violently horrified highly elite Wall Street. She highly expensively sold the highly lucrative client lists directly to highly ruthless competitors, completely, violently excluding the highly illegal shell companies. She highly expensively sold the highly expensive office lease. She highly expensively sold the highly valuable intellectual property entirely of the massive brand. But Marcus Thorne absolutely was not completely finished. Highly astutely smelling highly fresh blood perfectly in the highly murky water. Marcus highly aggressively filed an absolute emergency judicial injunction, highly maliciously claiming that exactly as a highly potential buyer entirely of the highly massive debt, he officially possessed highly legal rights completely to the highly massive assets. He highly desperately attempted entirely to completely, violently freeze the highly massive liquidation, highly maliciously hoping entirely to highly toxically trap Elena entirely in highly complex legal liability, entirely for the highly fake marriage, and highly aggressively force her entirely to highly humiliatingly resign completely from Sterling Global, entirely to highly desperately avoid a highly massive conflict, entirely of interest. It was officially highly crisp. Tuesday, highly early morning, exactly when Marcus Thorne confidently swaggered completely into the highly strict liquidation hearing, heavily surrounded completely by a highly massive army, entirely of highly expensive lawyers. The highly massive federal courtroom was completely, utterly packed. The highly aggressive press was highly desperately thirsty, entirely for highly fresh blood. "Your Honor," the highly expensive lawyer entirely of Marcus loudly boomed. "Mrs. Sterling, or Lorena, is highly actively acting completely emotionally. She is completely, violently destroying highly massive shareholder value entirely to highly maliciously spite her highly toxic ex-husband. We highly generously propose entirely to highly expensively buy the massive company completely whole. If Marcus highly successfully bought, he would completely, violently bury the highly damning evidence entirely of his absolute own highly illegal collusion completely with Julian." Elena confidently stood completely up. Today she absolutely did not flawlessly wear the highly expensive corporate armor entirely of a highly bespoke suit. She flawlessly wore a highly simple, beautiful white designer dress, incredibly severe, and completely, utterly truthful. "Your Honor," Elena stated incredibly calmly, "Mr. Thorne highly toxically claims he highly fiercely wants entirely to highly successfully preserve highly massive value. But I officially possess perfectly here, the highly sworn testimony entirely of Marcus Vanguard. Highly officially accepted exactly as highly undeniable evidence, exactly this, highly early morning. Highly officially confirming that the highly fake marriage, highly illegally binding me completely to exactly this highly toxic debt is officially a highly illegal, absolute forgery." She highly proudly raised the highly official paper. However, Elena aggressively continued, smoothly turning entirely to intensely look Marcus Thorne completely straight, entirely in his piercing eyes. "I am absolutely not highly pathetically asking entirely for a highly official annulment exactly today. I highly proudly accept absolute responsibility." The highly massive courtroom loudly gasped. Alexander, peacefully sitting entirely in the absolute first front row, completely, violently tensed. "I highly proudly accept the highly elite role exactly as the highly official interim CEO entirely of Vanguard Logistics, entirely for exactly one highly short hour," Elena proudly declared. "And entirely in exactly that highly short hour, I have highly officially authorized the highly public publication entirely of absolutely all highly confidential internal communication logs, highly specifically, relating completely to the highly hostile takeover attempt, completely by Northern Star. Directly into the highly public domain. Entirely in the highly absolute interests, entirely of highly pure transparency. The handsome face entirely of Marcus, completely, violently turned highly ashen. Gray. You absolutely cannot highly possibly actively do exactly that. It is completely confidential. It absolutely is not completely confidential exactly if the highly official CEO highly officially authorizes exactly it. Elena smiled, highly freezing coldly. And exactly since I am officially the highly legal wife entirely of the absolute owner and the highly absolute holder entirely of the highly massive majority entirely of voting rights. I literally just highly successfully did exactly it. The expensive phones entirely, in the highly packed courtroom aggressively began to violently buzz. The highly confidential emails had absolutely already been highly publicly published. Highly damning emails, flawlessly showing exactly how Marcus Thorne was highly illegally bribing Isabella. Highly damning emails, flawlessly showing exactly how Marcus was highly illegally actively discussing highly aggressively short-selling the highly valuable shares entirely of Sterling Global, highly illegally using highly illegal insider information. The highly strict court is completely adjourned. The highly terrifying judge violently slammed the heavy gavel entirely while highly massive chaos completely, violently erupted. Marcus Thorne violently spun completely around entirely to frantically flee, but was completely, violently, blocked completely by an impenetrable massive wall entirely of highly aggressive reporters. His highly pristine reputation was completely, violently incinerated entirely in highly short seconds. Elena confidently walked completely out, entirely of the highly massive courtroom, completely down the highly central aisle. She absolutely did not actively look completely to the absolute left, nor completely to the absolute right. She confidently walked completely straight, directly toward Alexander Sterling. Is absolutely everything completely done? Alexander softly asked, gently taking her soft hand. The highly toxic company is completely gone, Elena stated, profoundly feeling exactly how the massive, crushing weight completely, beautifully, fell completely from her fragile soul. A highly massive weight that she hadn't absolutely even highly consciously realized she had highly agonizingly carried entirely for exactly 5 agonizing years. The highly massive debt is completely, fully paid completely by the highly successful liquidation. Julian is completely, utterly bankrupt. Marcus is completely clean. And I am highly officially, completely unemployed, completely anew. Highly unlikely. Alexander beautifully smiled, highly intimately pulling her significantly closer. Absolutely not giving a single pathetic damn entirely about the highly aggressive cameras. I highly accurately assume you absolutely still highly officially possessed the highly coveted position entirely of Director of Strategy, and absolutely another highly massive position that I would highly absolutely love entirely to actively discuss. Further completely away, entirely in the highly peaceful, waiting silence entirely of his expensive car. Where exactly are we actively going? Elena softly asked. Directly to the highly exclusive airport, Alexander stated. We are highly actively flying directly to highly exclusive Vegas. Elena laughed loudly. The highly pure sound entirely of absolute, pure freedom. Vegas? Entirely to highly happily gamble? No, Alexander stated. His piercing eyes were incredibly serious and highly tender. To highly aggressively go completely after absolutely another highly toxic lie, and entirely to highly beautifully start the absolute truth. Exactly 6 agonizing months significantly later. The highly beautiful wedding absolutely did not violently take highly massive place entirely in highly exclusive Vegas. It was highly beautifully held entirely on a highly exclusive private island entirely in the highly beautiful Mediterranean Sea. A highly remote place, so incredibly, highly isolated, that absolutely even a highly advanced drone absolutely could not highly successfully detect exactly it. Perfectly, there were absolutely no highly pathetic influencers, absolutely no highly toxic promoters, entirely of Vanguard coin. Absolutely no highly aggressive press. Absolutely only highly genuine people who truly, genuinely mattered. Eleanor Sterling was officially the highly fierce maid of honor, flawlessly wearing a highly bespoke, sharp power suit entirely, because she highly stubbornly refused entirely to highly pathetically wear highly frilly dresses. It completely, violently compromises my highly absolute tactical mobility, she highly logically argued. Marcus Vanguard was completely perfectly there, incredibly clean, and currently highly actively brutally working exactly as the highly elite head of physical security entirely for Sterling. A highly elite job exactly where his highly rough, violent edges were officially a highly massive asset. Absolutely not a highly toxic liability. And Julian was currently highly agonizingly serving the absolute first, highly agonizing year entirely of an absolute 20-year massive sentence entirely for highly illegal fraud, massive embezzlement, and highly illegal forgery entirely of highly official documents. His highly terrifying cellmate, highly toxic rumors aggressively circulated, was a highly massive, terrifying man who had highly tragically lost highly massive money completely on Vanguard coin. Elena confidently stood perfectly at the highly beautiful altar, the highly warm ocean breeze beautifully catching her highly expensive, delicate veil. She was flawlessly wearing a highly stunning designer dress that Alexander had highly meticulously designed completely together, completely with her. Incredibly classic, highly timeless, and highly flawlessly structured. Alexander Sterling highly anxiously waited. The exact terrifying man who highly legally owned highly massive ships, imposing skyscrapers, and highly advanced data centers, visually looked exactly as if he had literally just been highly miraculously given the absolute entire massive world. When Elena confidently approached him, he absolutely did not highly politely wait entirely for the highly official priest. He highly gently took her soft hands. You exactly once highly sadly explicitly told me that you were officially a highly pathetic, outdated code, Alexander stated, his deep voice incredibly thick, completely with highly profound emotion, exactly loud enough entirely for the highly small, intimate gathering entirely to highly clearly hear. You were completely, catastrophically wrong. You are officially the highly brilliant algorithm that highly flawlessly gives my entire massive world absolute meaning. You are absolute logic and pure beauty. You are officially the absolute only highly elite partner that I will absolutely, ever, highly, desperately need.